Does everything go back to childhood? Can people experience a trauma at 16, 21, 29, 33 that will impact them so severely as an adult?
If you look at the studies on post-traumatic stress disorder, 100 soldiers go into battle, 20 come out with PTSD, 80 don't. Why not? The 20 that go home with PTSD are the people who were traumatized in childhood. And the adult experience simply triggers the old trauma. Even in concentration camp survivors, those that had safe, supportive early childhoods had a much better chance of coming out of it without significant trauma symptoms. I think it all goes back to childhood. I think that's when our brain is formed, that's when our personality is formed, that's when our fundamental beliefs about the world are formed, that's when we develop either positive or negative attitudes towards ourselves, towards our possibilities. I think it's all happens in the template of childhood. And later on, how we deal with adversity that comes on later on is very much conditioned by how we were first raised. Trauma is not the events. Trauma comes from the Greek word for wounding. So trauma is a wound that you sustain. And you can be wounded without catastrophic events, where people aren't doing bad things to you necessarily, but the good things that should be happening are not happening. So you can hurt people by hitting them. You can also hurt people by not giving them water, so not meeting their needs. In that sense, we have certain emotional needs as human beings that this society not only fails to meet, but actually tramples on very deliberately and very chronically. So a lot of children get traumatized, not just by what happens to them, but by what doesn't happen to them that should have happened. Trauma, again, is not what happened to you, it's what happened inside you as a result of what happened to you. Recognizing what trauma is as an internal psychological wound with manifestations in your body actually allows you to heal it. Creates coping mechanisms. Now, one of the ways that we cope when children are traumatized, one of the ways they cope with it is to soothe themselves, and then that's where addictions come in. But another way to cope would be is if you get the message that you're not good enough, that you are not worthy enough, then you might spend the rest of your life trying to prove that you are. And how do you do that? By being very nice to everybody. By never saying how you feel, because they might not like how you feel. By never expressing healthy anger when somebody's crossing your boundaries. By working too hard to prove that you're worthwhile. That's why I was a workaholic doctor, because I got the message as an infant, as a Jewish infant under the Nazis in the Second World War. I got the message that the world didn't want me, I wasn't good enough. Well, then you spend the rest of your life compensating by taking on too much, and you're stressing yourself. And those stresses have an impact on your physiology. They have an impact on your immune system. They have an impact on your cardiovascular system, on your heart, on your nervous system. They can cause disease. So most diseases that most of my colleagues, the physicians, think they're just random, arbitrary diseases, they're not random or arbitrary at all. They're the result of life-strong stresses that result from a child's attempt to compensate. Doesn't throw a tantrum.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I have seen adults throw what I would call the adult version.
You've seen you have children in adult bodies who throw tantrums.
Interesting. Okay, go on.
You know, so the adult who throws a tantrum, he's a traumatized child who has not developed self-regulation. I'm not talking about repression of self, but regulation. So, for example,
help me differentiate.
So, for example, I throw up at the airline counter, and they've overbooked the airplane, okay? My healthy response is disappointment and some degree of anger. I'd say, this is not right that you did this. I want you to redress it. You do something about it, please. Throwing a tantrum, yelling at the poor clerk behind the counter had nothing to do with creating the problem. Was just trying to do her job and trying to help me as best she can. That's not a mature adult. That's a child. First few years are so important. And so if you have children, make those 3 or 4 or 5 early years the most important years of your life, to devote them to your children. And if you as an adult are suffering from depression, anxiety, addiction, illness, or whatever, go back to your childhood and find out how you were hurt and heal that hurt, and then you can heal yourself.
How could you have let's say, people who are raised by the same parents in the same way,
Mm-hmm.
one becomes a narcissist
Yeah.
and one doesn't.
Because no two kids are raised in the same family. No two children have the same parents. Do you have siblings?
Yes, older and younger.
You weren't raised in the same family. You were never the oldest child, were you? You've never had that experience of being the oldest child. You've had the experience of the middle child, which is often very difficult, by the way, because you no longer, you neither have the respect and authority of the oldest, nor the cuteness and lovability of the youngest. You can't compete with a baby, you know, for cuteness. Not only that, when your parents had you, and when they had your younger siblings perhaps, they might have been in a different stage in their own personal development, or in a different stage of their relationship, or a different economic position. Furthermore, you never had the experience of not having somebody older in the family than you. You never had the experience, at least until your younger sibling came along, of the insult of I was the only one, and all of a sudden I have to share my attention with this young interloper, which is what your oldest sibling had to do. You know, so no two children. Not only that, even more importantly, temperamentally, every child is different, and that means they evoke a different part of the parent. So even if the parent loves their kids equally, which is not, I'm not questioning, they will not respond to the child the same way. The child will not evoke the same responses from the parent, one child or the other. So no two kids have the same parents.